Okay, welcome everyone. I think it's time to officially start this webinar. It's 12 in our time zone. So today is the second Lunch and Learn workshop that we prepared for you as a consequence of the Flow User Forum 2022. Today's topic is IFS Cloud and Flow OData Connector. So basically everything that you should know to start using connectivity with IFS Cloud from Novacura Flow. And so let me present my guests today, Irshad Hassan. He is our software engineer from Sri Lanka, and he is involved in the OData Connector project as a product owner. I hope Irshad will extend this little presentation about himself when he starts talking. And quick reminder, my name is Lukasz Majer. I'm your host today. I'm Director of Marketing at Novacura. I'm from Poland.
I'm Irshad Hassan, working as a software engineer for Novacura R&D. And today our topic is IFS Cloud and the Flow OData Connector. So let's have a look at the agenda. I've clicked it. Yep. So today we'll be talking about introduction to IFS Cloud. What is IFS Cloud and how does it differ from the previous versions of IFS? And also we'll be talking about OData and what it has to do with IFS Cloud. And we will also talk about the challenges the OData or IFS Cloud in general poses when you migrate to IFS Cloud. And in the next session, we will be talking about the Flow OData Connector. We'll introduce the Flow OData Connector to you, and also we'll do a small demonstration of that OData Connector. And then we will look at some of the cool features of the OData Connector. Yeah, the slide was skipped, I think. Yeah, so we'll look at some of the cool features of the OData Connector. And at last, we will be discussing about the roadmap and the future ahead for the OData Connector. Okay, let's move on. There's a bit of a lag when I click the slide, I think. So IFS Cloud. What is IFS Cloud? IFS Cloud is the latest version of IFS application, and it is drastically different from the previous versions of IFS. And it does represent a paradigm shift in multiple fronts. So it's basically a single platform that delivers solutions across focused industries in IFS. So in earlier versions, IFS used to have different products for different industries, but with IFS Cloud, they have moved all of them into one single platform. And also it is a move from a Windows-based client to a more modern web browser-based experience. IFS started this journey with IFS App 10, but in IFS App 10, you had the Windows client along with it. But with IFS Cloud, all of its IFS functionality has been moved to the IFS Arena client, which is a browser-based multi-platform user experience. And then the most important change that affects us is the IFS has moved towards API-first approach. So with the IFS Cloud, IFS has decided to move to totally API-based business logic and data. So all of IFS data and business logic are now exposed as APIs, and they are OData-based RESTful APIs. So since we talked about OData, let's see what is OData. So OData is actually a protocol, or it's a standard that defines the best practices for creating and consuming RESTful APIs. With OData, OData uses RESTful principles at its core. So you will be using HTTP verbs to create or query data from IFS backend, and it's ideal for the data-centric APIs. So it's not only IFS that uses OData. Actually, the OData is started by Microsoft, and it then became an open standard. So Microsoft uses OData a lot in its platform, like MS Office 365 and the Dynamics 365. And also SAP uses it in NetWeaver, IBM in WebSphere, Salesforce, Acumatica, so on and so forth. So with this change, OData thus presents us a set of new concepts. So for someone who's coming from a more SQL and PL/SQL background, I would like to give an introduction to OData with this slide. So let's take a simple scenario. I want to query this customer info view, and I want to fetch all the data from that customer's view. In previous versions of IFS application, how would you do that? You would just click, you would create a select statement, select all from customer info. But in OData, you would send a HTTP request to an endpoint that is exposed by IFS Cloud, and then you will receive the customer's records. So as you can see, it has two parts. The main part that is that refers to the OData service. In IFS terms, we call it as projections. And then the endpoint that exposes the customer records. So a single OData service can have multiple endpoints. So the same OData service might expose customers as well as customer addresses in another different endpoint with customer address. So that's a very simple query we've looked at, and let's move to a bit more complex one. So this select query is actually not selecting all the records. It's filtering records based on certain criteria, like it want to have a filter based on the contract and the part number. And also it has an order by. And we are not selecting all the attributes in this view. We are selecting just few attributes. So let's see how we can implement the same thing in IFS Cloud and with OData. This is the OData query that is generated, or query that could give the same results as this SQL query. So here, and the blue part represents the endpoint for OData. And then you will have this green part with $select. This $select is actually a OData expression that says which columns you want to select from the endpoint. And there's this $filter OData expression, which defines the conditions that this endpoint or the dataset should be using. So in my $filter, I have added contract and part number as well as quantity fields. And as you can see, OData doesn't use this equal sign. It uses instead EQ operator. So it is equal to the equal sign. And similarly, quantity on hand is actually a numeric column, and it doesn't use this greater than sign. Instead, it uses greater than operator. So it has its own set of operators that we could use on. And at last, you can see this $order by that is actually we are trying to fetch, trying to add an order by to the result set based on this location number attribute. So we've looked at how you query data in OData, and let's look at a transaction. Let's see how can I create a record in OData. So in IFS app 9, if I want to create a customer record, I would just call this customer info API.new PL/SQL method and pass my parameters. In OData, you would be sending a HTTP post request to this endpoint, and you will send the data that is required to create this in the HTTP body. Similarly, if you want to update a record, you will be sending the updated value in the body, but this time it will be a HTTP push request. So as you saw, we have compared how it works in SQL versus how it works in OData. Does that mean we can just convert all these SQL and PL/SQL methods to OData? No, I have just created this slide to give an idea about the OData for people who are more familiar with SQL. So OData is not SQL, it is different. OData and SQL are two entirely different things. So OData does process its own set of constraints, and IFSs move towards the OData APIs in their backend, thus presents us a set of challenges. So let's see what are the challenges we might expect or we might encounter when we move from previous versions of the IFS application and when we try to migrate to IFS Cloud. So what are the challenges with the OData APIs? The first and the most important one, there's no direct database access. So with IFS OData, you won't have direct database access, which means you can't just write SQL and PL SQL code. Instead, you will have to use the APIs that are provided by IFS. So what does that mean for customizations that you have? Then you will have to find a way to move those customizations into IFS backend and provide the API interface. And also with IFS Cloud, the authentication is very different. So gone are the days when we were authenticating against IFS just with the username and password. It will be APIs. So in order to talk to an API, you just can't have the credentials and talk to it. You need to have an access token. So IFS Cloud has its own authentication and access control management component. So in order to get a or talk to IFS OData endpoint, you need to have that access token. So you need to know how you can access the APIs. There are different authentication scenarios IFS Cloud supports. Depends on the integration scenario that you want to implement. It can be either interactive authentication or it can be a non-interactive authentication based on service users. And also grants are handled very differently in IFS Cloud. Earlier days, we had this concept of permission sets with the PL SQL packages. So when you have access to that PL SQL package, you usually can perform actions in that. But with IFS Cloud, there's no PL SQL packages that are exposed. So you need to, instead, you will have to use the IFS OData services, IFS OData projections, and use those grants in that level. So if your integrations or if your apps are based on the PL SQL package grants, then you will have to probably switch to IFS projection based grants. And the next challenge you would face with IFS Cloud is actually translations, because the translations are handled very differently in IFS Cloud. You need to opt in that you want to have the translated text. So you need to set certain parameters in your data request, and there's some overhead attached to it. So it's not straightforward as it was in the earlier PL SQL implementations. And talking about configurations and customizations, so there are no custom fields in IFS Cloud. It's referred as custom attributes now. So you will have the same custom tables, custom fields, custom attributes, and custom enumerations in the database, but they are exposed in a different way in IFS Cloud. So if you have custom configurations, so even customizations, you need to find a way to expose them through the OData APIs. And media and document handling in IFS Cloud is different from the earlier versions. So usually we will be needing to make multiple requests if we want to upload a media, image, or a document to a IFS endpoint. So there's a lot of overhead in the IFS Cloud that you need to take care of if you want to have that functionality. And talking about enumerations, IFS Cloud is handling the enumeration very differently. It generates its own set of enumeration values for the enumerations we have in the database. So if you want to have that same functionality as the PL SQL version, you will have to find how do you map these enumeration values. And if in earlier versions, you might remember if you are executing a PL SQL block, usually you will get the warnings or info messages as an output. But in IFS Cloud, you will have to opt in for that. You have to say, okay, I want to enable the warning messages. I want to enable the info messages. Give me that option. So there's overhead added to the OData call. And the most important thing that is highlighted here is that not every SQL operation has a corresponding OData operation. So you can't just smash SQL and OData and say, okay, now we are done. It's not like that, because SQL and OData are based on two different contexts. So they are two different structures. So it does not translate from one-to-one mapping. You will find certain things in OData that the SQL support, but the OData doesn't support. And also the OData operations are based on HTTP APIs. So it means it's stateless by nature. So you can't just roll back just how you do it with the PL SQL implementations. So it's stateless by its nature. So these challenges does seem maybe overwhelming at first, but we are here to help you on your journey to transforming and migrating to IFS Cloud. And we are prepared. Let me introduce this all new IFS Flow OData Connector. It's a no-code flow connector that easily connects to IFS Cloud, and you can work with IFS OData endpoints in a no-code way. Basically, you can perform the CRUD operations without writing any code. And also, we have taken a great care to reduce the knowledge that is needed if you are to work with OData. So if you use this connector, you don't have to be an OData expert. We have taken great care to reduce this knowledge gap when you move from PL SQL to OData. And it's built for IFS Cloud, but it also can be used with IFS application 10 Arena clients, because from IFS App 10 update 8 onwards, we have the same APIs as we have in the IFS Cloud. So if you want, you can use it with the OData connector. And also we support all the authentication scenarios specified in the IFS Cloud documentation. If you refer to that documentation, there are multiple scenarios that their APIs are supporting. So we handle all of the scenarios, like interactive way of authenticating or non-interactive way of authenticating. And we does support IFS custom objects as well as custom projections. So any of your custom configurations that you have in your existing models will be by default available in the IFS OData endpoint, and you will be able to consume those while using our OData connector. And if you have any custom implementations or customizations, you will have to use custom projections in order to achieve the OData API status in IFS Cloud. So if you happen to have custom projections, our OData connector can help you to work with those projections by seamless integration. And supporting translations, we do support translations, and we do support the custom headers. So if you have need to have translate text, the OData connector supports this in a no-code way. And built-in document and media handling. So this connector has its own built-in document and media handling. So you don't need to do anything special. You can just use the connector configuration and you'll be good to go. And there are many more good features of this OData connector. So rather than talking about it, let's see a demo of this OData connector in real action. So I will explain a demo scenario, and then I will try to do the same demo scenario in the Novacura Flow. And by using the OData connector, we will show you how you can work with the IFS Cloud. So here's my demo scenario. I'll be starting from IFS client, Arena client, material requisition page. So material requisitions are actually created for internal demands. So I will use this material requisition object, and I'll try to create a record in the material requisition page. So you need to set few mandatory parameters like site and internal customer. And then you set the due date, and let's save it. So we have created the material requisition, and then we will create a material requisition line for that same header. So this is the requisition I created in my previous step, and I will add a new line. So here I just have three mandatory parameters. One is to select the part number, and the due date is fetched from the header, and you can just give a due date, a due quantity here. Okay, so now we have created the requisition header and its line. Now let's check if we are to reserve this requisition, we'll need to check whether I have enough stocks in my inventory to reserve the material for this requisition. To do that, we can make use of this available to reserve command. When you click on that, you will be shown a window where it shows all the stock records that are available to reserve for this given part and this for this given site. So as you can see, here's this OData filter that is being implemented for this page. So as you can see, it's not straightforward, it's quite complex. It has multiple parameters for filtering, and also it tries to use enumerations in its search. So enumerations are handled very differently in IFS Cloud, as I said in my previous slides. So we know now what are the available stock records I have. And next up, I would do a reserve of the materials. Since I know now I have material to reserve from my inventory, so I can click on this reserve command to reserve the materials. And then at last, I will be issuing the reserved materials. So in my previous step, I have reserved the material requisition. Now in this step, I will issue it by just clicking on this issue command. Okay, so now I have explained the demo scenario. So I'm starting from the requisition header, create the line, check whether you have stocks to reserve, then reserve it, then issue it. So all this is done in the IFS Arena client. So now let's see how we can achieve the same flow, the same process. We'll talk into the same OData endpoints in the Novacura Flow by using the Novacura Flow OData Connector. So for the purpose of this demonstration, I have already recorded me creating this workflow. So save some time, as well as to switch to stop me switching between apps. I have already recorded the workflow that I'm creating. So let me play that recording for you.
Let's create a workflow for the demo scenario. I have this user step named material requisition. So as part of my demo scenario, the first step is to create the requisition header. The requisition header had 3 mandatory fields named site, internal customer, and due date. So I have 3 fields for them. So I need to find the OData endpoints that I should be calling to fetch a list of values for these 2 dropdowns. How can I do that? We can figure out that with the help of debug console that is available in the IFS Arena client. I'll go to the IFS Arena client and enable the debug console. And I'll show you an example. When I click on this new icon, you can see it looks the OData call that's been invoked. And when I click on the site dropdown, there's another OData call that shows the OData endpoint invoked to fetch the data for this dropdown. Similarly, if I click on the internal customer, there's another OData call that fetches the data for this dropdown, and I click save, and it goes on and on. So this information is helpful, and we need this information in our workflow. So we'll be using the debug console a lot. Okay, I will copy this information and use it in my workflow. So I'm back to my workflow. So the first step is to fetch the list of values for sites dropdown. For that, I will create a machine step. I'll name it as fetch user allowed sites. Open it up. And I will choose the connector configuration named IFS Cloud. This is my configuration for the IFS OData Connector. Then I click on this select operation button, and I'll be presented with the screen where it shows a list of OData services, or in IFS terms, projections. So I already know which projection I will be using thanks to the debug console. It's called material requisition handling. We'll expand that. And there are multiple, a lot of endpoints in this projection. So which one we should be using? Again, I'll go back to the console, and it's named as reference user allowed site LOV. This is the one that's been used in the Arena client. So we'll expand that. And this time it's going to be a read operation. So just double click on the read. So this OData query is actually a pretty simple one, as you saw in the debug console. So I don't have any where conditions, but I can select which columns that I want to be included in the result set. So there are only 2 columns in this case. So I'll select all of them, and I'm not interested in defining a record count or skipping any records at this moment. Also define a variable for this machine step. I'll call it as user allowed site rec. Click OK, and I'll connect it to my user step via a data arrow. Now, for the site dropdown, I can define that result set as the data source. I can choose the user allowed site rec variable and click on this results table. And if I go to the large row text, now I will see the suggestions. The fields that you could use in this are actually the fields that you define in the select part of the machine step. So I just choose 2 columns. There were actually only 2. So I will use both of them. That's site and its description. So we have figured out the site dropdown. And now we can show a list of values for this dropdown. Similar way, we can find the data source for the internal customer number field as well. So let's do that quickly. I have created the machine step to fetch the internal customers as well. So it's again a simple query like the user allowed site. So there are no where conditions, and I have defined the columns I need in my result set. And I have I can go and bind that result set to the internal customer number dropdown. Similarly, I could choose the column I want to show. Okay, now we have figured out two dropdowns, and the next step is to create the requisition header. So we need to create the requisition just like how Arena client does. I will create a machine step to create the requisition. Let's create a workflow for the demo scenario. I have this user step named material.
So as you can see, I have already created the workflow. So let's see that created workflow in action. So I have opened up my Novacura Flow client, and this workflow has been published. And let's see how it works. Okay, here you go. Okay, so as you saw, we have implemented the same demo scenario I have explained in the Arena client in our flow by using the all new OData connector. So let's look at some of the cool features of our OData connector. I have mentioned this earlier, but we support all the authentication scenarios that IFS supports. So in this video, I'll play this video that is explaining how we can achieve single sign-on with the Flow OData connector. So I have this people find app, and then when I open that app, I'll be presented with a browser screen to log in. The same screen that IFS shows in its client. And now I will choose the external IDP, the external Asia ID. And then it will redirect you to your own domain. Then you are signing into, let's say I'm signing into my organization. Enter the credentials. And then we are using the Authenticate app. So we need to approve the sign-in as well. So you have completed the sign-in against your own organization. And then it will open up the Flow app again. So what has happened is in the background, IFS has exchanged the access tokens from your organizations against its own IDP. So we have given access to the IFS Cloud backend. So we can access the APIs and show and work with them. So we have full support for IFS authentication, IFS Cloud authentication scenarios in the OData connector. And the next up, one of the cool features that we have is we hide away a lot of complexity that is associated with the OData. Let me just give you an example. This view here is actually, a quite a simple view where we are trying to figure out the stocks that are belonging to this site. And we are also trying to filter by location type. So I want to show only the records in these location types. And if you look at the OData filter that is being generated for this query, simple query, it is not straightforward. There's a lot of text that's been generated by IFS because you are working with enumerations when it comes to location type. So they are handled differently. So this query is not as straightforward as it might seem in the GUI view. I have extracted that query away. The dollar filter you see here, it has the contract, quantity, and part number filters, and as well as for each location type, you are combining these query parameters by an OR operator, and then combine this whole thing to the master query with the AND operator. It's not straightforward as it seems, but how can we do that in the IFS OData connector? Let me show how you can do that in the connector. I'm starting with the same window, or trying to access the same endpoint as the IFS client. And then I'll add a condition. I'm trying to fetch and filter by location type. So what you can do, we have this in operator that we have included in the OData connector. You can just select that and provide a set of values that you want to filter against. So you don't have to write for each and every value. You don't have to write a O condition. Instead, you can use this in operator that we have provided in the OData connector and make this query a lot more simpler. Does that mean IFS supports this in operator in its IFS Cloud backend? No, this is not actually supported by IFS. This is a feature we have added because we feel it should be a lot simpler to work with IFS OData APIs. So as you can see, this query has been transformed to this more simpler version. So the OData connector, what it does is it do the job for you. When you create this in the OData connector, behind the scene, it will generate this whole query because IFS doesn't support in operator, and then it will simplify your job. That's a cool feature, right? And also we have a lot of developer friendly small features to reduce the development time and effort. For example, if you want to do some sort of a customization to work with IFS Cloud, you'll have to go to the API Explorer, find what is the projection that you want to use, and then refer to their documentation, find out which endpoints, which required parameters I should be filling out, what are the data types. As you can see, you will have to go back and see the API documentation and understand what are the parameters that I should be working with. But with the OData connector, we have simplified this process. When you click on the, let's say I'm trying to create a record. So when you click on this create operation, it will auto-generate the fields for you. And also it differentiates between the required parameters and optional parameters. And we give you the option of, whether you want a calendar for the date field, and whether if it is a enumeration, we will show a list of values. So you don't have to go back to the API documentation. You can just work with the endpoint by just looking at this screen, because we have provided all the information that you need for you. And also we support custom objects, whether it is existing custom objects to existing IFS entities, or if it is even a new custom projection. It works seamlessly. So OData connector doesn't differentiate between IFS's own projection versus the custom projection. It treats them as equal, so you won't feel the difference. So in this example, I'm trying to fetch from a OData endpoint that has custom fields defined. And when you go to the select, you should be seeing all the fields and also the custom fields that are added for that entity. And you can select them. And even you want, you can add them to an order by or even for the where condition. Similarly, we work with custom projections as explained in the previous slide. Custom projections works the same way as a usual IFS projection. And we have the built-in document and media handling capability. So if you open up a IFS Cloud configuration, you should see document and media library functions here. And you could upload documents, download them. You can upload images and download them without needing to know the exact endpoints or the parameters that you should be passing. So we made the job of the developer a lot easier. And we also support custom HTTP headers. So through custom HTTP headers, we support translations. So if you want to have translated text, you can just add a custom header in our OData connector for accept language. And then whatever the language you are specifying there, if it has a translatable text in IFS Cloud backend, you would receive the translated value. So here's how you do it. You add a custom header and name it as accept language, and then specify the value. So in this case, if I want to say receive values from in Swedish, I can just say SV. And one more important core feature that we have, we handle the IFS exception in 200 responses. So in each OData configuration, you can specify whether you want to break the workflow on error or you want to continue. If you choose to continue on error, even if a IFS exception occurs, we will try to continue the flow and show it in a 200, show the exception in a 200 response. So this you can configure it in the connector configuration, or for each machine step, we have the capability to set that. And there are a lot more than what I have explained up to now. We have a code operation if you want to write code. And we also have extensive debug capability in our connector. So if you want to see a communication log, what are the OData endpoints that have been called when I work with this workflow, we show them. So it is a great tool to work with the IFS Cloud and makes the job of Flow developer, whoever who's trying to connect to IFS Cloud, makes their job a lot easier. So we've talked about what we have now, and let's talk about the roadmap and the future. So we are working on these new features right now. We are working on a no-code batch operation. We have support for batch operations via code, but we are working for a no-code solution. And also we are trying to implement more and more built-in OData query functions. And also we are implementing an iterator there where you can loop through a set of records and perform the same OData call. And there we have extensive backlog of OData connector features that we are currently working on. And you will be seeing the new features in near future, and in mostly coming months. So with this slide, I'm coming to an end to the presentation, and Lukasz, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your part. We are coming to the end, so I will quickly go through my final slide, and then there will be time for you to ask some questions. So, yeah, the good message that we have to that this fully equipped Novacura Flow OData IFS OData Connector is now available with the Flow 6.14 version, and I hope you will positively evaluate all these features that Irshad has presented, especially this no-code concept and a lot of support that is given to the developers, like this in syntax in statement that we use that is not supported by IFS, just to name one. You might be you might think about what's the price for that such advanced connector. So is this price okay, or maybe this, but then, well, probably paid under the subscription. Is it right price or not for that? Well, we believe it's not. We want to give it for free for those of you who already purchased the older version of IFS Connector. So if you already use any of IFS connectors in your Novacura Flow, you're entitled to use this totally new, fully equipped OData connector for IFS Cloud. We do that because we want to support your migration into the IFS Cloud version. Now, very quickly, if you want to know more about this connector and also about OData, the simplest answer is visit to our blog, novacura.com/blog, and then you will see a lot of articles about OData. And I would like to especially emphasize a series of articles that we will create, and we just started doing it. In the first article, that is not directly connected to the OData connector, but we talk widely about OData and some challenges in a context of IFS. In this first article, we listed and gathered all the values you might see when you plan your migration to IFS Cloud in a context of OData API. And in the next, in upcoming articles, we will cover particular barriers and we will talk about them. For instance, we will talk about efficiency, potential efficiency issues. We'll talk about authentication and such a things. So stay with us, simply visit our blog and preferably subscribe. Don't worry, it's only one email a month and you will not miss any of our latest OData blogs. Now is the right time for answers and questions. I assume we have like 7 minutes for that, and then we will do a quick survey. So let me bring some of the questions that are in a Q&A. We have this, I will read it. Does this mean when we upgrade IFS, we are bound to purchase the REST API license? What to do with the already developed flows using only CQL? Probably very complex question, not easy to give the answer in short words. Is it possible to somehow give some advice on that? Paul, maybe you want to somehow answer, or Irshad?
Yeah, sure. I can take this one. I think overall, if you're looking to communicate with IFS via the cloud, the REST APIs are their standards and their ways of using it. So I would strongly suggest looking into the licensing model. However, there are other ways in regards to communicating with it more in a better fashion in regards to passing in SQL and creating your own custom projections to talk through. We didn't really talk through this concept today. We're aware of it and we're using it at some of our customers who have already adopted to cloud. So if you guys are looking into the best way to upgrade your flows, you should come to us and we should have sit down chat about the flows you're looking to upgrade. In some cases, we may suggest using what they would call as custom projections. In other cases, we might suggest that we refresh the flow and build it in the new process. So happy to talk about this in more depth, I think, Kalistas.
Yeah, thanks. I think we have no time to talk more about it because it's like a separate topic for a separate workshop, probably. Another question is, are you able to join queries from different OData endpoints in a similar way like we would do in SQL when we're joining tables? Or do we need to do a separate OData call and combine them in Novacura Flow? Yeah, very good question.
Yeah, I can take this question. So if your endpoints are all pointing towards the same OData projection, then you should be able to combine it with a batch request with the OData connector. But if they are trying to fetch from different OData projections, then it is not possible. Then you will have to use separate machine step for each projection.
Can I add to that too, Irshad? Is that okay?
Yes.
Also, IFS has allotted a new tool in their 2022 R1, I believe, called the Query Builder, for those who aren't familiar with it. And what that lets you do is build your own projections by combining views for one OData endpoint. So you could take two separate views in IFS, join them on specific fields, and then make one endpoint to call, which we can consume through our OData connector.
Which also means that this is a very similar way of working as we have right now with PL/SQL. I mean, you move a part of the logic to the IFS side, but not to the PL/SQL database server, but now to the projection server. But yeah, still by the server side. Okay, can I use flow script operations in the OData connector? For example, regex, I don't know. Yeah. Probably my pronunciation is okay. So once again, can I use flow script operations in the OData connector? Yeah.
No, not at the moment. It's not supported yet in the connector.
But
it is on our roadmap, and I would add to that we also can use flow script on any output of a field, obviously via a script step or a flow step. But we are talking about how to handle input into like an OData open API through flow script.
Yeah, thanks. And one more question that I would like to bring is, what about performance via OData? And here is a comment: since it is going via another layer, will it not be slower than direct PL/SQL access and so on? So yeah, that's the obvious, obvious doubt that might come when we analyze a new API. Is it slower than the conventional PL/SQL API?
Yeah, we have this issue from IFS App 10 onwards, because as mentioned there, the queries go through the OData API. So its OData API is like a middle layer that sits between the database and the client. So earlier you used to access it directly, now you have to go through this API. So it is obviously a bit slower than a direct access, but it's part of the move towards the IFS Cloud from IFS. So they are working on a lot of these enhancement to the performance side. So one thing we could do as developers is to create projections and try to generate try to use the queries that are more performance efficient inside the projections. Instead of just joining set of tables, set of entities in projections, we can think of a better way to use or create projections by joining or using the query builder tool, as Paul suggested earlier, to create views that are already joined and then expose them in the OData point, rather than trying to join two OData endpoints into one.
Yeah, so basically to not move the logic to the flow server side, but rather to keep it, the whole filtering and so on, yeah, or sorting at the server side. It's now possible with the query builder. Yeah. I hope we covered all the questions.
Can I take one more of these, Lukasz? There's one. On a performance site, is it good to have one connector with all IFS endpoints, or as an example, one for each module? I think what's important to note here is that this IFS OData connector runs as a connector as a service, which is a new a new item, a feature that we've sent out to all of our customers. Therefore, you can have a few of these running in parallel if you see fit, as long as you have close proximity to a server for IFS and you can host these things as a service. It could be better to have multiple in parallel. Those are things that we would need to investigate with the type of transactions and the amount of transactions that you're running through the connector itself.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, for bringing
Yep.
it up. Yeah. Let me then introduce all of you to a little survey. We still have like 2 minutes for that, so I hope it will be enough.
Lukasz, there's one more on here, which I think is a really good one as well that we missed. Naren's.
Another?
Can I?
Oh,
sorry.
yeah, the last one. Yeah, sorry.
Yep.
It
So
just came.
Naren, it's a really good comment. We are transitioning the apps on them. So the question is, when will the marketplace be converted to OData? We are working on that right now, actually. We will have our first couple apps in the next weeks, I would say, maybe months with maybe a month with documentation. And one of those will be the create requisition workflow that you're asking about in your first question. Can I see the code? And you guys will be able to see how we turn on those projections and how we utilize them in our marketplace applications.
So thank you for today. I hope you enjoyed the show, and see you the next time.